Solidarity and shalom, everyone. Welcome back. I know it's been quite a while. Um, I've been taking a break for mental health reasons, and I'm also um, just letting y'all know that my videos are going to be a little less frequent as they have been before. I'm still going to make videos, but for the sake of my mental health, and the longevity of this channel, i want to I really want to make sure that I stay mentally healthy and sharp, and I can still provide some content for y'all without having to burn myself out and cause undue stress. But anyway, today's a very special one. The day after Mao Zedong's birthday, we're going to be talking about Mao Zedong Thought, and sort of going to try to use this bite-sized bit of time to clarify what it is, because people seem to get confused on what Mao Zedong Thought is quite often. Um, so Mao Zedong Thought, I think that the first thing we need to talk about is the confusion of terms. Is that there's a lot of similar terms that get quite confusing when talking about Mao Zedong Thought. I think the first one is that there was a lot of groups that were not Chinese during the 60s and the 70s that called themselves Marxist Leninists and Mao Zedong Thought followers. And these people arose out of the Sino-Soviet split, and they decided to side with China. And it was the original quote-unquote anti-revisionists, and it was born out of the New Left. Now, Mao Zedong Thought is an exclusively Chinese experience. And so these groups labeling themselves with Mao Zedong Thought were not actually following Mao Zedong Thought, though they dogmatically took qualities of it and tried to apply it to their situation. What they were doing is really labeling themselves on what side of the Sino-Soviet split they chose. This happened in the 60s and the 70s. And it's definitely not to be confused with Maoism. And Maoism is also a non-Chinese phenomenon that arose first out of the New Left and the Sino-Soviet split type Mao Zedong Thoughists, and eventually changed and synthesized into a new thing during the 80s with groups like the Shining Path and the Naxalites and the New People's Army and the Philippines. These are all separately developed Maoist ideologies that came out of the tradition of the New Left in the 60s. But let's stop talking about what Mao Zedong Thought isn't, and let's talk about a little bit about what it is. Mao Zedong Thought is simply Marxism-Leninism applied to the Chinese conditions during the era of Mao Zedong. This includes the contributions of not only Mao, but the entirety of the Chinese or of the Communist Party of China during the era of Mao. So people like Liu Xiaoqi, Zhou Enlai, Lin Biao, and even the Gang of Four. These are some of the few names that contributed to what Mao Zedong Thought was during the time of Mao Zedong. Now, some of the qualities that we can recognize from Mao Zedong Thought and during his life, and the sort of things that we can look back at and say, I recognize this as Mao Zedong Thought. Or things like land reform and the peasant question. Before Mao Zedong took over the Chinese Communist Party during the Long March, or even started his own founding of an army in 1927, the Chinese Communist Party was very dogmatic and they thought that only the workers could lead the revolution. And Mao was one of the people who said, no, we need to give land reform to the peasants, and we need to, appeal to the peasants. This is our largest demographic. So the peasant question and the use of the peasantry, much like the Bolsheviks did, is a key quality of Mao Zedong thought. The method of revolution, which is the protracted People's War, that method of revolution that was exclusively successful in China when it comes to establishing a socialist country. That method is a key quality of Mao Zedong thought that really a lot of non-Chinese left adventurists find this to be a very appealing method of revolution. But I think that it worked for a period of time in the 20th century under Chinese conditions, and that's how we should view the protracted People's War. Not protracted struggle, but the People's War. New democracy, the establishment of new democracy, which is the supremacy of the Communist Party and the working class over the lumpen, or the peasantry, the petit bourgeois, and the bourgeoisie under Chinese society, under a new type of new democracy, to help develop the productive forces so full socialism can be implemented one day. Another quality is the Great Leap Forward, which was an attempt at rapid acceleration of industrial forces, which worked to a large degree, but also had its issues being coincided with a famine and having quite a lot of poor decisions being made. But we have to remember that at that time, these people were experimenting. No one else had attempted to build socialism before, but they had. They were the first ones, and of course they're going to make mistakes. And one of those biggest mistakes was the Cultural Revolution, which many prescribed to be a part of Mao Zedong thought. Now we have to remember that not all of these ideas came from Mao Zedong, but Mao Zedong was at the head of the party during the time, so we associate it with Mao Zedong thought. Now this is a lot of like the past, right? This is what Mao Zedong thought meant during the day of Mao, but we see that the modern Chinese Communist Party of China prescribes to a version of Mao Zedong thought. The official ideology of China is Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping thought. The three represent scientific outlook on development and Xi Jinping thought, and socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, what does Mao Zedong thought mean to modern China? Because we look at things like the Cultural Revolution and the supporting of People's War across the world. We see these things that are not so much a part of modern China, even though China claims Mao Zedong thought. Well, they have rejected the incorrect ideas of Mao Zedong thought, such as the contributions of Lin Biao and the Gang of Four, which was the time of ultra-leftism, left adventurism, violence, poverty, and destruction. And they've kept the good things, such as new democracy, which is one of the main qualities of Mao Zedong thought that is a part of modern China. Some of these ideas like new democracy and the question of land reform and things like that have stood the test of time in China, unlike the ideas of, say, the Cultural Revolution. And so the parts of Mao Zedong thought that are still intact in modern China are the ones that the party has deemed to be correct and incorrect through social practice. As Mao Zedong said, where do correct ideas come from? Do they drop from the sky? No. Are they innate in the mind? No. They come from social practice and from it alone. And this social practice of the entirety of the Chinese experience, of the Chinese people, have taught them what ideas from Mao Zedong and Mao Zedong thought are correct, and what ideas from Mao Zedong thought are incorrect. But we have to remember that and recognize that Mao Zedong thought is an entirely Chinese experience, and that when Westerners try to emulate it, it only becomes distorted and it loses all meaning because it's not attached to its base. Mao Zedong thought is simply Marxism-Leninism applied to the Chinese condition during the era of Mao Zedong. This includes not only the contributions of Mao, but the entirety of the CPC during the era of Mao. It is not Maoism. It is not something that can be applied outside of China. We can learn lessons from Mao Zedong thought. We can learn lessons from the correct and incorrect ideas from the social practice of the Chinese experience. But we cannot emulate an entirely Chinese experience outside of China and apply it to, say, Western conditions, which is the majority of my audience. So I hope that helped clarify some things. Mao Zedong thought isn't Maoism. It isn't the Sino-Soviet split Mao Zedong thoughtists of the West. It's an entirely Chinese experience. And that is still, the correct and incorrect ideas of it are still used and understood in modern China to this day. And I think that that's what I want to stress, is that it's an entirely Chinese experience, and that we should not try to emulate it as Westerners. We should try to learn from it. Yeah, so thank you. I will be trying to put out videos when I can. From now on, it's going to be a less frequent thing for the sake of my mental health, but I appreciate everyone who came and watched this today, or another day if you're coming and watching this later. If you have any comments, please put them down below. I'll try to reply to those that I can, and everyone have a wonderful new year. Solidarity and shalom. Goodbye.